think we can start. Well, good to see you all showing up for this XDB session at Scale. Mike, for the ones that don't know you, don't know him, he's actually the guy that started with Glass Mapper. So you can actually support him on Patreon so that he can actually maintain the project. And give the word to you, Mike.
Cheers, thanks Rob. Everyone hear me all right? Cool, okay, so I'm talking about using XDB at scale. But how many people think I'm going to talk about the database? Who came here to talk about? Right, no one raised their hand, so everyone read the blurb. Okay, cool. Okay, so what I'm actually, so as I said, Rob's already introduced me. So I'm Mike Edwards. I've worked with Sitecore for 11 years, and I founded the Glass project about 7 years ago now, something like that, 6, 7 years ago. So it's been, we're on version 5 now. But what I'm going to talk about today is about actually trying to make the content editors happy when they're working with XDB, and especially at scale, because one of the things we found when trying to use XDB to do personalization was that Sitecore out of the box doesn't provide a lot of tools when you need to personalize across an entire site. So I'm going to talk about a client I worked with and have some examples of kind of the problems they were facing when using XDB and how we solved them. So straight into it. So I was working with a company called EUROCONSUMERS. How many people have heard of EUROCONSUMERS or any of the brands at the bottom? Okay, cool. So for those who are in the UK, EUROCONSUMERS is like Which. So they do product testing, consumer advice, consumer legal advice, that sort of stuff. So, you know, they get all the TV sets, turn them on, tell you, which has got the best screen resolution, best audio, best sound, which is the best buy, which is the best value. And so they have, as you can imagine, tens of thousands of products on their website, tens of thousands of products in different languages as well, because they're working across the entirety of Europe and Brazil. And their whole model is based on subscriptions. So it's a very busy site. It's a very large site. There's a huge amount of content on it. And so we need to be able to kind of personalize across the entire site. So the first problem we had, was can't get rid of this now, it seems. There we go. All right. Right, we'll ignore that for now. So the first problem we had was profile cards. We're gonna do it. This is where the presentation is. Right. So I'm hoping everyone here, have you all set up profile cards in your Sitecore solution before? Yeah? And everyone knows you click on the blue head. Then once you get the blue head, you then get this sub-screen where you can select which profile cards you want, how much percentage should be applied to that page of that profile card. So if it's a car page, you might apply like 50% car and 50% family or something like that, and you've got, so you're trying to apply your profile cards to the site, to the individual pages across the site. But when you've got a site that is, say, tens of thousands of pages, how do you do that in a practical way? Are you going to go to your content team and say, hey guys, guess what this week is? It's going to be this process. It's this 5 steps of click on the head icon, select your profile card, click OK, save the page, and then repeat that 10,000 times. That's probably in a day, a content editor will probably get 100 done, and then the next day they don't come to work. Just can't face it anymore. So we're like, well, how do we solve this problem? Because, as I said before, with this website, they've got a section on TVs, they've got a section on cars, they've got a section on hi-fis. So we want to be able to say that entire section is about cars. That entire section is about TVs. And we know that anyone goes to that section, we want to just tag and say they are, and then maybe they're just going to tag and say they're interested in electronics or they're interested in motor vehicles. We want to do this on a large scale, but in a way that allows the content team to actually still maintain control of this. So we're not hard coding this into the code base. the mouse does not look at me. So these were some of the problems that we sort of initially assessed were the main things we needed to tackle. So the current implementation doesn't scale well because we obviously the click, 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 repeat. That could almost be a real picture of one of our content team, just crying in the corner. This means that actually they just don't do it. So we don't actually ever get that metadata about what content people are looking at. So we lose a lot of value within XDB because content teams just don't want to do that. A big one is if the content teams do it, and then we say, oh, you know that profile card, we actually need to change it. We want to swap it out with a more specific profile card. Can you go back and just do those 10,000 pages again? At that point, they're sort of pulling out a knife and walking towards you slowly, and you're backing off to the corner. So what we came up with is rules-based profile cards. Like with the Sitecore API, basically everything, you can basically fiddle with everything. It's one of the great things about Sitecore is everything is customizable. So we thought, right, could we do it through the rules engine? So what we created is a centralized container which would contain all our rules-based profile cards. So we just create a Sitecore item like normal. It's got a rules field on it. We assign the profile cards to that item in the standard way. So you still click on the head, still assign your profile cards there. But most importantly, there's a rules field. And because it's a rules field, that meant that we could allow the marketing team specifically to set anything they wanted in this section. So if it's a time of day profile card, they could do that. If it's a section of the website, because you've got the descendants option in the rules-based profile card, we could now tag the entire TV section as electronic with just one rule, rather than having to go to each page. They have custom rules based on what type of subscription someone has. So we could say, right, if that person's a subscriber and they're looking at cars, we can now tag that person as awesome or something. I don't know what they wanted to. But also it meant that if any of this changed, we just went back to one location and we can change that again. So suddenly we've now been able to tag and profile thousands of pages of content from one area. And if we need to change it, it all goes back to one area. And the way that we do this is, we run the rules engine on every request that comes in. But we cached that stuff. So, the rules engine is relatively quick, so it's not a huge amount of overhead. And the additional overhead is worth the time saved in terms of the content team, because this makes their life easier, and what makes the content team's life easier always results in a better website. Because one of the things we have to consider when we design our Sitecore solutions is, and I think this is, maybe this is an overgeneralization, but I think a lot of the time we all focus on what is the site going to look like to the end user. So we're making that the best experience. But sometimes we forget what the content team's got to do themselves. And if the content team's editing environment is awful, the content they're going to put onto the website is going to be bad, because they're just not going to want to use that site. If you give somebody a bad tool, they'll just do a bad job. And if they do a bad job, then no matter how good the front end is, that's going to be rubbish as well. And then that's going to affect your customer base. So you have to think about the tooling that you supply to the content editors as well. And this is part of the way we were addressing that. So a bit of code, because how many people are developers? Cool. How many people are marketers? Solution architects? Other? Cool. So for the developers in the room, it's pretty simple stuff, actually. There's a pipeline. There's always a pipeline to override. The pipeline exposes these tracking parameters. And annoying, I didn't put the pipeline name in. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can look that up for you guys if you ask me. But it's very simple. You just you run the rules that are on the rules field, and then there is a tracking field that is one of the standard fields on Sitecore. You just pass it into this field, add it to the collection, and whatever tracking parameters you have, or any tag and profile cards you have on that item are automatically added to it. I was quite surprised by how few lines of code I needed to actually do this. It was a relatively simple thing to implement. If anyone's from Sitecore, please. No. Really simple to implement, only a few lines of code, but added a lot of power to the actual content editing environment for our teams. So yeah, these are advantages. So yeah, it was all centralized in one location. So if anything needed to be changed, we know where to go. We can straight out of the box. We are no longer just limited to assigning pattern cards based on the page that someone uses, because the current implementation just says you will be assigned this card if you happen to hit this page. Our solution allows us now to say we can assign a pattern card. It doesn't matter if you don't even hit a page. We might just say it's there's a campaign running, so we might just assign you a pattern card just because we are somebody who we know that you have signed up to a campaign. So we might say you're a campaign subscriber or something like that. So it gives a lot more flexibility in what we can do with the profile cards. I'd say whole sections of the site can be set and easy to delete and change at a later date. So that made our content team a little bit happier. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what we call override renderings. So one of the things the company does, it offers, across the site, it has a lot of advertising banners about subscribing, because we're trying to get people to subscribe to the service, join up. And so across the site, if I go to the next slide, it's probably a bit easier to see. We have multiple variations of call to actions to get people to sign up to the site, offering different incentives, free trials, and that sort of thing. One of the problems we had, though, is we want to be able to customize this. So the obvious scenario here is that we've been tagging people with profile cards, and we can now tell that somebody likes televisions or they like cars. And it'd be really great to be able to take one of these adverts and say, right, for everyone who has a really big interest in TVs, we want to show a television next to that advert. Okay? But these adverts, they're across 10,000 pages, because they're a component on a page. Okay? So how do we override that across all these pages? The current solution for personalization in Sitecore is you go to a single item, go into your experience editor, you select your component, you click the little head icon again. It's always a head icon. And then you set your rules. So you've done one page, and you're like, right, now we've got to go to the next page. And again, it's this problem. It's like click, click, click. And again, a content team is not going to do this. Especially with the personalization rules, it's even more clicks, it's even more complicated. Even doing it over 5 to 10 pages is a non-trivial task. It's probably going to take you half an hour at least. You may also make a mistake as well. So if you go wrong, or maybe you get halfway through doing a number of pages and you set your rules up, and then suddenly you realize, we need to change it slightly, right back to page 1 again, start again. It doesn't scale well in terms of getting a content team to do this. So we wanted a way, again, of being able to centralize how we override all these advertising components. So we came up with centralized renderings. So before we developed the solution, we were like, right, what options do we have? So one option was to do it on standard values. But standard values, they're owned by the development team. So if the marketing team came along, started specifying rules on standard values, the next time we deploy the website, we'd just wipe that out. We'd just completely overwrite that. That would disappear, and then the marketing team come and complain at us, and we just go, shrug our shoulders and walk away. Another option was placeholder fallback. Who's used the placeholder fallback module? No one? That surprises me. Okay, so the placeholder fallback module, I think, was developed by Hedgehog Development. And the idea with that module is that, say you've got an empty placeholder on your page, what the system will do is it will start looking up the ancestors of that item to find a component that could live in that empty placeholder. So the idea being that you can leave these empty placeholders in your lower pages and then have it configured at one higher page. So it kind of sounded like that would try and kind of solve our problem. But it wasn't really going to really work because we already had all these components deployed across our site. So if we were to try and do that solution, we'd have to remove all the components we already had on our site, then make sure that we've got this component on a placeholder higher up, and hope that that page also had the same placeholder name as the one lower down. And it was like, right, there are too many moving parts here, and it's just too fragile. Additionally, the adverts were not always in the same placeholder. So it would be the same component, but in different placeholders on different types of pages. So that wasn't really going to work for us. So we sort of ruled that out. So the final thing was to come up with some way of having a single location to contain all our configuration. We didn't know how to do that, but we'd ruled out the other two obvious options. So we had to go with 3 and work out how to make 3 work. Okay. We also had the requirement that on some pages, components may already have existing rules on them that are just specific to that page. So those rules had to be preserved. So we couldn't blast away those rules. And the rules, if they were running campaigns and stuff like that, those rules should also apply if there wasn't an override. So we had to make sure that whatever solution we came up with did not break whatever rules were already configured in the system as well. They had to sort of be merged together. So our solution was what I'm terming centralized overrides. It's not the sexiest title in the world. I'm not in the marketing department, so I just come up with very literal names for things. Okay, so what we did is, first off, we went with, let's create something that's called centralized. So we came up again with having a component overrides folder. And this component overrides folder was a location where you could drop in a normal Sitecore page kind of item. And you could just go in there and configure it like a normal Sitecore page. So you can go into the experience editor. You can start dropping your components into that page. You can start adding your personalization rules. It would just feel like the regular Sitecore editing experience. And then we would make the magic happen at runtime. And so what that magic does is when a page is rendered, we check through this centralized component override section. We see what pages are there, and we see what renderings are on those pages. And then we say, right, if the page the user is requesting has component A, and our override, one of our override pages has component A, we'll merge those two together. Okay. So because each, because they can have multiple pages under the centralized location, they could also then bring campaigns together as well. So if we go back to this page, you can see that here we've got 5 variations. There's more than 5 variations, but these were just the first 5 I found. What they could do is they were running a campaign of personalizing. Say they wanted to what they wanted to personalize all 5 of these to have the same kind of rules, so that the campaign was consistent across the entire site. Then in this section here, they could create one campaign for those variations. They could add the 5 components to this campaign with the overrides. And then wherever those components were on the site, they would be overridden with the personalization configured on this central campaign section. Okay? So instantly, they've now updated and personalized 10,000 pages from one location. If they've got a separate campaign, it would be beneath it, and the system would just run through compiling all the rules together to make this big stack, and then whichever, obviously it's like rules engine, whichever one won would be presented, but it meant that all the campaigns were also grouped together. So again, it became very easy for the content teams to actually understand, right, where is our personalization rules? What campaigns are running? If we need to turn, maybe they need to turn one of the campaigns off and stop all that personalization for that campaign, well, they just unpublish it in one location, and suddenly all the items are affected and updated in one go. In terms of content editing time, you're saving hundreds of hours, at least. The other important thing is that we are putting the configuration for these campaigns back into the marketer's hands, because the only other way to do it would have been to actually maybe hard code this on each component And that would have been really tedious, and that would have required a lot of dev effort and a lot more complexity in terms of development time. So, how does this work? So, the left-hand side of this, yes, left-hand side, looking at the screen. This is our override. The right-hand side is the page that the user requested. And so all we're doing is we look at the two components and how they're configured, and we start to merge those rules into one stack. So the override rules come first, and then the page rules come second. And so what happens is that if none of the override rules apply, so maybe somebody isn't meant to be in this campaign, then they just drop back to the normal page rules. So this gave us the nice ability to say, right, we've got these global centralized rules, but you can still do whatever you want on that single page, and they will still work and it will still apply. This is all done at runtime as well, so we do caching of this as well to try and speed things up, because you can imagine it's quite an intensive process. So again, Sitecore pipelines always save the day. Like, there should be a motto in Sitecore, like, if you want to do it, find the pipeline, because everything's implemented this way. So the get XML-based layout definition is a pipeline that is run that actually generates the final layout that Sitecore will process. So I think it's the locations where the shared and final layouts are merged. Standard values are also merged in there. So we can also merge our stuff into there as well and customize that. And it's actually relatively simple, because the layout is just XML. So, I had to brush up on my XSLT, but luckily I've come from Sitecore 5.3, so I did XSLT back in the day. So it wasn't completely terrifying. Obviously, put a load of horrible descendants queries in just for fun, but yeah. So all we do is we take the rules that are configured on the central components, and then we just inject them into the XML above the existing rules, and it was that simple. I was like, huh. Saved thousands of hours of thousands of man hours for our marketing team with just a few lines of code. And again, I was expecting this to be harder, but I was quite chuffed that it wasn't. There are a few rules that we came up with. A few things we learned when we were implementing this. Firstly, we're like, right, don't merge the overrides when you're in the experience editor, because the experience editor will just become weird to the user. So what I mean by that is when somebody goes to a page and they want to edit the page-specific personalization rules, don't insert your centralized customization rules in, because they'll also see that in that box. And then that will actually get saved to the item. And then it becomes really messy, because your overrides are now actually on the page rather than being separated off. Reverse the order of the overrides. The reason for this, so if you look at this list here, we've got 3 campaigns. The way that we are injecting is that we inject the rules on top of the existing rules. So we just inject it position 0 all the time. But if you did that with these 3 campaigns, then actually campaign number 3's rules would be injected last. So actually within the rules stack, they would be at the top of the rule stack rather than at the bottom of the rule stack. And that meant that campaign 3's rules would apply first, and it would exit out first. For a developer, that might be quite easy to understand, but the content team themselves would come into this folder, and they'd expect campaign rules 1 to go first, not campaign rules 3 to go first. So you need to just at runtime reverse it so that the logical way the rules are applied actually matches the way that they're listed there. Remember to always ignore the default rule when you inject your rules, because the default rule always wins. So what would happen is the override rules would run, the personalization rules wouldn't work, but then the default override rule would kick in, and none of the page rules would then get run, because the default rule is always true. So on your overrides, just remove the default rule if you're going to try and do this. As I say before, cache everything, basically. Once you've parsed your override rules once, cache it and only clear it when a publish happens. Because there's a lot of processing that has to happen to process all the XML that's in the layout and then break it apart pull out the bits you need and then inject it into another one. So heavily cache this. It doesn't, I mean, you're not using masses of data, so it's not too much of a problem, but yeah, just for performance, make sure you're caching. Okay. So that was number 2. That allowed us to centralize. So we're now able to tag our users centrally. We're now able to centralize our personalization for our users. So the last thing we wanted to tackle was, how do we do A/B testing site-wide? Who's tried A/B testing in Sitecore? Okay. So most people probably aware it's, again, it's page-level testing. So you compare one version of a page to the next version of a page. That is great for if you're just doing your landing pages. Like you've got an entry page to your site, or running a marketing campaign for a specific page. Brilliant. But we're trying to run A/B tests again over all these items. These are the things that are our call to actions. We're not looking at a single landing page. You know, our entire site is a sales pitch. So we're trying to, we want to A/B test this. Does the picture of the car or the washing machine get more people converting? You know, does a sports car versus a family car encourage people to convert? You know, we want to do this across the 10,000 pages again. So this was a really tricky one, and because I initially looked at how we could do it through the existing Sitecore A/B mechanisms, and it was clear that was just never going to work. The existing Sitecore A/B mechanisms is very hardwired to a page setup. Personally, I wonder why that is, because you could have quite easily abstracted the concept of A/B testing into some very generic functions that you could have then wired in elsewhere, but unfortunately it is very hardwired. So we want to do A/B testing promotion across multiple pages. We need this to be consistent messaging across the entire site. And we also, again, like A/B testing, once we know somebody's on variation A, we want to keep them on variation A all the time. There are reasons for that as well, because if you might want to, in your A/B testing, say to one user, if you sign up today, you'll get a Samsung Galaxy S7, whatever the other one is. Or you might want to say to some other user, you're going to get an iPhone. And you want to consistently show those messages to those users so that you can tell, does an iPhone versus a Galaxy convert better? But also so that when the user comes back to the site, they're not going, well, last time I saw an iPhone, and now I'm getting a Galaxy, but I really wanted the iPhone. And you sort of get people going, where's my iPhone gone? And also, we wanted to set up start and end dates, a bit like campaigns as well. So we didn't want to develop anything that was too customized. So we wanted to make sure that we could still use the standard features in Sitecore, maybe abuse some of the features a little bit, but we wanted all the reporting still to be in Sitecore. So there's this thing called outcomes. Who's used outcomes in Sitecore? A few people? Outcomes were in our solution, but we just weren't using them for anything. So I thought, here's something that gets reported in XDB that we're not using for anything else, and I can slightly abuse. So we decided to use outcomes as a way of flagging a user, well, flagging that a user has been assigned to a site A/B test. So we're going to call it site A/B test. That was important because an outcome lives with a user when they return to the site as well. So when somebody's attached to an outcome and they return back to the site, you can get that information back from XDB. So now we had a way of tracking a user across multiple visits, like which campaign had they been assigned to. Then we needed a way of trying to track which variations somebody had been assigned to. So this again was a bit of an abuse really, but we decided to use goals in this again. So if a user was shown variation A, they would be assigned goal A, and if they were shown variation B, they'd be assigned goal B. Additionally, it's worth noting that you weren't, at this point, also limited to just 2 variations. Because we now we're using multiple goals. We can nest as many goals as we wanted. We could actually make multiple variations and do A, B, C, D, E, F, how many variation testing you wanted to do. How useful that would be, I don't know, but there was now that scope as well for the content teams. So once we've assigned somebody, so when somebody comes to the site, the first thing we would do is we go, are you assigned, have you got an outcome? If you don't have the outcome assigned, then what we'll do is we'll assign you an outcome, and then we randomly decide which variation you're going to get assigned to. So then you'll be assigned a goal. So if somebody's come along, their XDB profile now has an outcome assigned to it and a goal assigned to it. Using that information, we can now say, we then could create a custom rule on our personalization rules to say, right, if the user is in one of the campaigns, which is an outcome, and the user has this goal, then we will show them variation A or variation B. So unlike the sort of Sitecore A/B testing, it's a bit more manual because we're having to use the personalization rules to actually control the variations that someone sees. But it did allow us at least to track what variations people saw and how many people were part of a specific campaign. Also, the advantage of the variation rules is that it meant that we could also now, again, using the rules engine, decide more specifically when a component would be opted in or out of a campaign. So we could then later on maybe drop in other components if we wanted to into that A/B testing campaign if necessary, say because somebody missed a component on a specific page. So it gave us a bit more flexibility. One thing we didn't get around to, because it was still sort of proof of concept and just trying it out, was that we didn't add any way of automatically calculating winners and losers. So instead, what the marketing team had to do is they had to then go into the Sitecore XDB, and they would then be able to see how many people visited a specific outcome. So the outcome is the campaign, and then how many were shown each variation. I think I got the numbers the wrong way around there. But so they could see how many people got each variation, and then they would have additional rules, additional goals configured in the normal way on the target pages or the end process pages. So what they would then be able to do is, by querying XDB, they could tell X number of people got assigned to the site A/B test, X number of people saw variation A, and then we would query on another goal to say, and 10% of those people got to goal D, which was actually the sign-up page or to the download page or something like that. So they had to do that task manually, and we could have automated that later on if it proves valuable to them. But this was a way of allowing site-wide A/B testing. And what was nice is because it's now on the rules system, and we'd also developed the centralized thing, part of it, we could create a centralized site A/B test. We would then configure the personalization rules on the centralized personalization components. So that made actually doing site-wide A/B tests super simple and super quick for us. Very easy to run up. Cool. So fitting it all together, let's see. Site-wide A/B tests in one place, overriding renderings in one place, profile cards all in one place. No, the whole real talk of this is we just centralized everything, which meant for content teams they were really happy. So it's all in one place. They know where to go. They're not trying to dig down deep into Sitecore or into a content tree to find the one component that's misconfigured. They know exactly where to go. So much happier. Hours saved. Hours of work saved. Cool. So I sort of blasted through it. I always go either too quick or too slow. So, any questions?
We have some time.
Yeah.
Great demo, by the way. Like you say, some simple stuff that saves thousands of hours.
Yeah.
One of the things we have a problem with, and maybe it's the opposite version of what you're saying, is we often have a lot of things happening on lots of different pages, and there's no sort of high-level way to see what's going on for a content editor, and they don't know how to, if they go in and do something on a particular page, what's that going to affect? Because they didn't set up the other campaigns. Is there any way of have you given any thought to how you could perhaps help it make it easier for content editors to understand all the stuff that's going on 10,000 pages?
Unfortunately not. I think Horizon's meant to solve some of this, or one of the future UIs that are coming into Sitecore. Because you're right, yeah, when you go to a page and you look in the content editor, you don't know what rules might be assigned to anything. One of the big problems is trying to understand if I user X, what will I actually see? And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any good solution to that. And I think it would be also difficult, because as I said, we've got customized rules. So out of the box, how will Sitecore deal with our customized rules when we're trying to spoof another user? So at the moment, I would say there's no good solution to that.
Yeah, I mean, in an Explorer view, you can do it a page at a time,
yeah,
like everything else. But
yeah, it's not, no, unfortunately, never. Any other questions?
Hi, Mike. Great talk, by the way. Did you find, after you gave the content editors this power, that maybe with great power, it comes great responsibility and all the rest of it? Did you need to kind of say, well, look, anything you do here, is going to affect all these?
They just give them great responsibility, but at the same time, because it's in one location, if they were irresponsible, you just go to that one location and do it. So, they get much more power, but to take away that power is just a couple of clicks. Yeah. So it's just an easier life for everyone.
So did they tend to personalize by, template, generally speaking, or was it a whole multitude of things? Yeah.
Well, in this, as you saw from those advertising banners, those banners could be on any page, on any template. There was no specific location that those things would appear. So that's why we went for that solution. So it's not by component, it's really wherever they want. Whatever the marketing team thought would best do a conversion on that page, they would drop that banner in or that component in. So it had to be very flexible.
Any other questions? Thank you. Ooh, yeah.
Hi, Mike. Sorry, just a quick one, really. I don't want to try and throw you a curveball, so just. But in hindsight, would you do it this way again?
I definitely would do the centralized and the profile cards again. The site A/B testing works, but I didn't like the way that we had to kind of abuse outcomes and goals, because with the goals, we're kind of then using goals in two different ways. Like you've got the regular goal mechanism in Sitecore, and then we had this kind of tagged on goal mechanism for the A/B testing. And I think that just ends up creating a confused concept for the content team. Yeah. So if possible, I would have liked to have found a way that didn't use goals. But unfortunately, to get the data into XDB and actually have it report out through XDB without me having to do any customizing of the XDB reporting screens, because we could have tried to put other data into XDB in a different way, but then we'd have to have gone in and created a custom Speak UI for the actual XDB dashboard. And so that was that's just too much effort to prove that this is something that could work for us. So if there was another way of doing that part, that would have been good.
Yeah, otherwise.
Yes, I suppose we could do that. I didn't think of time. I'll give you a call.
Thank you, Mike.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Oh, yes. Sorry. So, yeah, if you need to contact me, then contact me on Slack and on the class Twitter handle. And, of course, as Mark rightly reminded me, should always thank the sponsors, because without them, it's not possible to actually hold this event. And, yeah, remember to visit all the sponsor booths outside.